The Dark Watcher. I should have picked a different night. A night that wasn't so ominously quiet, so dark, so perfect for what was about to happen. I stood outside the decrepit old factory that had been abandoned for years. Its brick walls were crumbling, and the rusted iron gates creaked at the slightest wind. I couldn't see into the topmost floor. The windows were too dark, too grimy. Across the street, the neon sign flickered. Bennett's Diner. It was where my wife, Marcy, worked as a waitress. She'd been distressed for weeks about the strange occurrences she'd noticed from the factory's uppermost windows, and with each passing day, the tension in me grew, fed by Marcy's growing anxiety. The factory's main entrance was bolted shut, but I was sure there'd be other ways in. Broken windows, loose planks, and other neglected points of entry. The padlock at the front gave way under a few determined strikes from my boot. There was something gratifying about that act of destruction. Inside, the air was thick with dust and a musty smell of decay. Faint scuffling sounds echoed from somewhere deep within the building, probably rats, I thought. My shoes crunched on broken glass as I made my way toward the staircase, the noise echoing oddly in the eerie silence. Marcy's words echoed in my mind as I huffed and puffed my way up the stairs. There's a figure in the top floor window, just standing there, watching the diner. She'd even mentioned once that she thought she saw it moving around. I promised her I'd sort it out, regardless of whether it was a vagrant, a curious kid, or someone with darker intentions. The staircase ended on the top floor. I paused, catching my breath and taking in the grim surroundings. The weak moonlight cast long, eerie shadows. The stench of mold and something far fouler assaulted my senses. I wiped my nose, set my jaw, and started counting the rooms, keeping Marcy's directions in mind. It was the last room at the end of the hallway, the one with the large, grime-covered window overlooking the diner. The room was dark, but a figure stood silhouetted against the window. My heart pounded, but I squared my shoulders and shouted, "Hey!" The figure didn't respond. It didn't move. An uncanny chill ran down my spine. I took a step into the room, and as my eyes adjusted, a laugh burst out of me. It was a scarecrow, dressed in old clothes and propped against the window. I snapped a photo with my phone and sent it to Marcy, typing, "Found your stalker. He's outstanding in his field." As I chuckled at my own pun, I turned to look out of the window. There was Bennett's Diner, Marcy's little car parked outside. My phone buzzed with Marcy's reply. "You went to that place alone?" Another buzz. "You shouldn't have, it's dangerous." Then a third. "Wait, that's not it. Sometimes it moves." I frowned, my laughter fading. The scarecrow wasn't the figure Marcy had seen. I was about to type a response when a cold, gnarled hand closed around my arm. The sudden touch sent a jolt of fear through me. I whirled around, my heart pounding in my chest. A figure loomed over me, its features concealed in the darkness of the room. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice echoing in the hollow space. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it stepped forward, coming into the weak moonlight filtering through the window. My breath hitched as I took in the sight. The figure was tall and gaunt, with a face hidden beneath a grimy old hat. Its clothes hung off its skeletal frame as if they were meant for a much larger person. In its hand was a rusted metal rod, which it was using like a walking stick. The figure didn't say anything. It just pointed the rod at me, then towards the window. My blood turned to ice. The figure was real, and it wasn't a harmless scarecrow. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed the local police. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out the ringing on the other end of the call. Before I could speak to the dispatcher, the figure lunged at me, swinging the metal rod. I ducked, feeling the wind from the near miss, and bolted for the door. My heart pounded as I sprinted down the hallway, the heavy footfalls of the figure echoing behind me. I reached the staircase and took the steps two at a time, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The sound of the figure's pursuit filled the factory, a haunting reminder of the danger I was in. I reached the ground floor and sprinted towards the broken entrance. The cold night air hit me as I burst out of the factory, the figure's chilling presence still looming behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached the bright lights of Bennett's diner. The factory loomed ominously behind me, its dark windows reflecting the neon glow from the diner's sign. As I caught my breath, my phone buzzed in my pocket, a reminder of the call I had yet to make. As I dialed the police once again, I glanced back at the factory. In the uppermost window, a figure moved, its silhouette framed against the dim moonlight. The real terror had just begun. My hands shook as I relayed the events to the dispatcher, my eyes never leaving the silhouette in the factory window. The voice on the other end of the call was calm, promising me that officers were on their way, but it did little to quell the fear that had taken hold of me. "I need you to stay on the line with me, sir." The dispatcher's voice was steady, but the urgency behind it was clear. "All right," I muttered, my gaze still fixated on the figure, who was now standing still, seemingly watching me from across the street. As I waited, I noticed the diner door open and Marcy step out, her eyes wide with fear as she spotted me. I motioned her back inside, not wanting to draw the figure's attention to her. She hesitated, but then went back inside, her worried eyes never leaving me. The sirens grew louder, echoing eerily in the deserted streets. Within moments, 2 police cars pulled up, their lights cutting through the darkness. Officers spilled out, their hands resting on the holsters at their sides. I quickly explained the situation to them, my eyes continually darting back to the factory. The figure hadn't moved, still seemingly watching us. The officers, taking my report seriously, moved cautiously towards the factory, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The dispatcher on the phone told me to stay where I was, to let the officers handle the situation. But as I watched them disappear into the factory, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Minutes turned into hours, the suspense making every second feel like an eternity. Finally, the officers emerged from the factory, their faces grim. There was no sign of the figure. They told me they had found the scarecrow and signs that someone had been living there, but whoever it was had disappeared. One of the officers promised they'd keep a patrol car in the area for the night and suggested I take Marcy home. As we drove away from the diner, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The figure in the factory had vanished, but its presence lingered, a haunting reminder of the night's chilling events. That night, the factory became more than just an abandoned building. It was a symbol of unspoken fears, a silent watcher in the darkness. The real horror wasn't the fear of the unknown figure, but the realization that it was still out there, lurking in the shadows. And it was this fear that would keep me awake for many nights to come. The Forgotten Grin. I should have left well enough alone. Staring at the decrepit warehouse from the safety of my rusty pickup, I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. The place was draped in the inky cloak of night, the flickering streetlights barely casting any light on the grimy windows on the 3rd floor. My eyes darted to the neon sign across the street, O'Connor and Smith, private investigators. The glitzy name was at odds with the rundown office it belonged to, but it was where my buddy, Rick, worked as a detective. My gaze returned to the grim warehouse. The front entrance was sealed shut with rusty chains, a padlock the size of my fist hanging from it. There were other means of entry I knew. Cracked windows, loose panels, back doors left ajar, but the padlock seemed frail, worn out by the relentless weather and time. It felt good to shatter it. Rick had been distraught for days, rattling on about what he saw from his office window, and the escalating tension was gnawing at my nerves. Stepping inside, I was greeted by the musty scent of age and abandonment, and a disconcerting scurrying sound from a distant corner, probably a rat. Dust particles danced in the slivers of moonlight filtering through the broken windows, and a grimy layer of forgotten relics and cobwebs clung to the walls. The warehouse hadn't seen use in over a decade, its innards slowly decaying. Rick had once commented that it would be cheaper to demolish the old heap and erect a new structure in its place. But the neighborhood was already riddled with vacant buildings, victims of the city's receding population. It seemed like whoever owned this warehouse had resigned to its demise. Rick's words echoed in my mind as I trudged up the rotting wooden staircase, my boots crunching on shards of broken glass and plaster. "In the window across my office," he'd said. That meant the 3rd floor. I clenched my fists, my heart pounding in my chest. I was here to put an end to this. Didn't matter if it was a junkie, a vagrant, or a deranged psychopath. They were going to get a piece of my mind, or they were going out the window. The police around here didn't concern themselves with deaths unless they were high profile or easy to solve. Reaching the 3rd floor, I paused to catch my breath. The hallway stretched ahead of me, a gloomy, decaying tunnel. The stench of mold, dampness, and something nauseatingly organic filled the air. I shook off the chill running down my spine and started counting the rooms, each one a gateway to more decay and desolation. The room would be one of the last ones, I figured. That would line up perfectly with Rick's window. As I neared the end of the hallway, my heart pounded louder, drowning out the eerie silence of the abandoned warehouse. Then I saw it. A tall, thin figure silhouetted against the dim light of the room's window. As I approached, adrenaline coursing through my veins, the figure remained still, staring out at the world beyond. I stepped into the doorway, my hands balled into fists, and yelled, "Hey!" But the figure didn't respond. Its stillness was uncanny, almost inhuman. I felt a chill ripple through me, but pushed it aside, stepping into the room. As I moved closer, the moonlight revealed the truth. I was taken aback, a burst of laughter escaping me. It was just a mannequin, a harmless, lifeless dummy. Catching my breath, I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo, sending it to Rick with the caption, "Found your stalker. Looks like he's got a wooden personality." Standing by the window, I could barely see the familiar silhouette of Rick's office. The mannequin was indeed perfectly opposite. I wondered if it was a prank or just a forgotten prop. My phone buzzed with a reply. "Are you crazy? You shouldn't have gone there." A pause, then another buzz. And that's not it. It moves sometimes. A cold knot formed in my stomach as I read the message. Then a sense of dread washed over me as a cold, unseen hand landed on my shoulder. I froze, every nerve in my body shrieking, my heart hammered in my chest, and a cold sweat trickled down my back. I dared not turn around, hoping against hope that it was just my imagination. But the icy grip on my shoulder was too real, too tangible. The musty air of the warehouse suddenly felt dense, smothering. The silence, once merely eerie, was now deafening. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, my rapid breathing echoing in the vast emptiness of the warehouse. Summoning every ounce of courage, I slowly turned around, half expecting to see another mannequin. The sight that greeted me, however, made my blood run cold. There stood a figure, taller and gaunter than any man I'd ever seen. Its skin was deathly pale, its eyes were vacant, devoid of any human warmth. It wore tattered clothing that hung loosely from its skeletal frame. But the most unsettling part was the grin etched on its face, a perverse mimicry of human joy. Fear seized me, constricting my chest and making my knees weak. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. I was trapped in the gaze of the creature, its eyes holding an inhuman fascination, a morbid curiosity. Then, with a suddenness that made me jump, it began to pace around the room, its movements jerky, unnatural, like a marionette being manipulated by unseen hands. It never broke eye contact, and that eerie grin never left its face. As I watched the creature in horrified fascination, my phone buzzed again, jolting me from my petrified state. It was Rick. "Get out of there now!" The text was like a splash of cold water, jolting me out of my stupor. I didn't need telling twice. Ignoring the dread that screamed at me to stay still, to not provoke the creature, I sprinted for the door, my heart pounding in my ears. The creature let out a chilling shriek, its voice echoing off the walls, filling the vast expanse of the warehouse with a sound that was equal parts rage and despair. I didn't dare look back, my only thought being to get out, to escape the living nightmare. I scrambled down the stairs, the creature's piercing wails echoing behind me. I burst through the entrance, my lungs screaming for air, and didn't stop until I was safely inside my truck, slamming the door shut behind me. As I peeled away, tires screeching against the asphalt, I glanced in the rearview mirror. There, in the third-floor window, was the figure, its hollow eyes watching me, that disturbing grin still etched on its face. That night, I learned the truth of the old adage, some things are better left alone. The Frozen Reflections. It had been just another monotonous afternoon for me, Gregory, when my wife Josie had called. She worked at a local boutique on the second floor of a dilapidated commercial building downtown. Josie had always had an active imagination, but this time her voice wavered with genuine fear. "There's something in the old factory across the street," she'd whispered into the phone. "It's been there for days, and it's watching me." The abandoned factory had stood for years, a hollow shell of a once thriving industry, its windows like dark, empty eyes staring out into the world. The idea of someone or something lurking in there sent a chill down my spine. With a grim resolve, I buttoned my coat, grabbed my flashlight, and headed out. The wind was howling as I reached the factory. The streets were silent, save for the occasional rustling of leaves, adding to the eeriness. The building loomed, its towering structure swathed in shadows as dusk fell. Peering up, I noticed the factory's third-floor window directly facing Josie's boutique. It was dark, impossible to see anything. I shivered, not from the cold, but from the anticipation of what I might find. My heart pounded as I approached the barricaded front door of the factory. It groaned under my weight as I pushed against it, and with a loud crack, it gave way. Inside, the factory was a relic from a bygone era, filled with cobwebs and dust. The air was heavy with a musty smell of decay and damp. A scurrying sound echoed in the distance, perhaps a rat. I shrugged off the unease and ventured deeper into the factory. The building had been deserted for over 15 years, left to rot and decay. Josie often joked it would be cheaper to knock it down and start over than to renovate it. But like the rest of the neighborhood, it had been forgotten. As I climbed the creaky staircase, my footsteps echoed through the silence, the sound amplified by my pounding heart. The third floor was where Josie had seen the figure. "It's always there, staring at me," she'd said. I clenched my fists at the thought of some peeping Tom scaring her. Whoever it was, they were in for a rude awakening. Stepping onto the third floor, I paused to catch my breath. The hallway was long and decrepit, doors hanging off their hinges. The air reeked of stale urine, rot, and something else, something unsettlingly organic. I clenched my jaw and counted the rooms as I passed them. Finally, at the far end of the hallway, I spotted a figure. Tall and thin, it stood by the window, staring out into the darkened street. I froze in my tracks, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure was eerily still. My nerves thrummed with tension as I called out. There was no response. A flicker of fear gave way to anger. I stepped into the room, my flashlight revealing the figure. A wave of relief washed over me, followed by a burst of laughter. It was just a mannequin standing there, staring blankly at the window. A weird prank or a forgotten prop, who knew? I snapped a picture and sent it to Josie with a text. "Your mystery stalker. Quite the stiff character, huh?" I chuckled at my own joke. I was about to turn back when my phone buzzed. "I don't understand. Why would you go there alone, Gregory? It's dangerous," the first message read. Before I could reply, another one popped up. "That's not him. He moves. Sometimes he walks around." A chill ran down my spine as I read the final message. My laughter died in my throat. I was about to text back when I felt a cold touch on my shoulder. I froze, every nerve in my body screaming. My heart pounded like a jackhammer. My blood turned to ice. My mind raced, struggling to rationalize what was happening. I had seen the entire room. There was no one there but the mannequin. Slowly, I turned around, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but the decaying walls. The room was empty, but the cold, tangible sensation on my shoulder felt too real to be imagined. My phone buzzed again, breaking the deafening silence. The light from the screen seemed too bright in the gloom. "Gregory, please come back, you're scaring me." I wanted to text back to reassure Josie, but my fingers were numb. I tried to swallow, my throat dry. I scanned the room again, my flashlight flickering over the corners, the ceiling, the floor. There was nothing, absolutely nothing. Then the mannequin moved. The sudden jerk of its arm was so abrupt, so unnatural that I stumbled back, my scream echoing through the room. I watched in horror as the mannequin's head slowly turned towards me. Its empty eyes bore into me, a soulless gaze that sent waves of terror rippling through me. I bolted, my mind a whirl of panic. I could hear the mannequin creaking behind me, the sound of its stiff movements echoing in the silence. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran, my only thought to get out. The stairs seemed endless as I descended, my breath ragged and labored. My heart pounded in my ears, the blood rushing like a torrent. I could still hear the mannequin, the creaking sound growing louder, closer. I fumbled with my phone, finally managing to dial Josie. "Josie!" I gasped, my voice hoarse. "Call the police!" Finally, I crashed through the front door, the cold air hitting me like a splash of icy water. I stumbled onto the street, my chest heaving, my body shaking. I turned around, half expecting to see the mannequin, but there was nothing, just the dark, empty factory, its windows staring blankly at me. The police arrived soon after, Josie following closely behind. They searched the factory but found nothing, not even the mannequin. I was left with nothing but my fear, the cold touch on my shoulder, and the memory of those lifeless eyes. To this day, I shiver at the memory of that night. The factory was demolished soon after, replaced by a modern office complex. But I never forget the terror I felt. It's a chilling reminder that not all is as it seems, especially in the shadows of an abandoned factory. The shadowed grasp. I'll never forget that night. The wind was howling through the narrow alleys, carrying the smell of the river and the damp decay of the old city. My name's Mike, and my girlfriend Selina had been having nightmares for weeks. Nightmares about something she saw from her office window that overlooked the disused railway depot, a place that hadn't seen a living soul in years. With her sleep disturbed and her nerves fraying, I decided I had to act. I needed to show her there was nothing to fear. She worked in a small real estate firm, sandwiched between rusty warehouses and faded brick buildings. From her window, she could see the old depot, a massive structure that had been left to rot. It was there that she claimed to see a figure, moving around in one of the abandoned train cars at all hours, a sight that filled her dreams with terror. I decided to confront this figure, this phantom, and put an end to Selina's nightmares. I was no hero, but I loved Selina, and if this was what it took, so be it. I zipped up my jacket and stepped out into the cold night air. The depot was a grim sight, a relic of a bygone era, now just a haven for rats and urban explorers. I took a deep breath and moved towards it, my boots crunching on the gravel beneath. I entered the depot, its skeleton-like structure looming over me. The wind whistled through the gaps, playing a haunting melody that echoed through the hollows of the vast space. Finding my way in wasn't difficult. Time and neglect had left the place open to the elements. I kicked through a weak wooden barrier and found myself inside, the wind now a distant whisper. The silence was almost unbearable, each creak and rustle amplified in the stillness. I moved towards the train car Selina had pointed out to me earlier that day. As I climbed the rusted steps to the car, my heart pounded in my chest. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, my breath short and ragged from the adrenaline and the cold. The moon's pale light filtered through the broken windows, casting eerie shadows around the carriage. Suddenly, a noise broke the silence. It was a soft scuttling, like something running on tiny feet. I stiffened, my pulse quickening. A rat, I reassured myself, nothing more. The depot was rumored to be teeming with them. Despite the reassurance, I couldn't shake off the sense of unease. But I pressed on, my resolve hardened by thoughts of Selina. I reached the train car she had described, its interior dark and foreboding. As I peered inside, I saw a figure standing in the gloom. A shock of fear coursed through me, but I steadied myself. I had come this far. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty depot. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, immobile and silent. My mind raced as I considered my options. Should I approach it? Could I take on this intruder if it decided to attack? I decided to risk it and stepped into the carriage, my every sense on high alert. To my surprise, the figure was not a person but a scarecrow-like mannequin dressed in old, tattered clothes. Relief washed over me, and I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Selina's phantom was nothing more than a dummy, probably left by some prankster. I quickly snapped a picture and sent it to Selina with the caption, "Met your ghost. He's quite the silent type." As I stood there, waiting for her reply, I looked out of the carriage window. I could see her office building, a tiny light in the darkness. Her cactus, which she kept on the windowsill, was barely visible. It was then that my phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. The message read, "Mike, that's not the figure I saw. It was never still. It moved around, like it was looking for something." The message sent a chill down my spine, my relief evaporating instantly. But before I could respond, a cold hand landed on my shoulder. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. Slowly, with a sense of dread creeping into my soul, I turned around. My eyes met with a hollow gaze of a figure standing behind me. It wasn't the mannequin I had laughed at moments ago, but a living, breathing person. Or so it seemed. The figure was tall and gaunt, cloaked in raggedy, moth-eaten clothes. His face was obscured by shadows, but I could feel the intensity of his stare. A strange sensation coursed through me, a combination of fear and confusion. The silence of the depot was suddenly deafening. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice echoing in the hollow train car. The figure didn't respond. He just stood there, unblinking, staring into my soul. Without thinking, I stepped back, trying to put some distance between us. My back hit the cold, rusted wall of the train car. The figure took a step towards me, and a sliver of moonlight illuminated his face. His skin was ashen, eyes sunken, and a twisted grin spread across his lips. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I fumbled to dial the police on my phone. My fingers felt numb, my mind spinning. I sent Selina a quick text, telling her to lock the office and call the police. I hit send and pocketed my phone, never taking my eyes off the figure. The figure cocked his head, the twisted grin still on his face. He didn't seem to speak, but the silence was broken by a guttural growl that sent shivers down my spine. I could smell the stench of decay emanating from him, and I retched, the metallic taste of fear filling my mouth. In the distance, I could hear the faint wail of a siren. Help was on the way, but would it arrive in time? The figure took another step forward, the grin widening, revealing rotten teeth. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the depot, followed by a bright light. My heart leaped as I recognized the beam of a police flashlight cutting through the darkness. The figure recoiled, hissing like a feral animal caught in the glare of headlights. He turned away from me, disappearing into the shadows with a speed that belied his apparent condition. The police officers burst into the train car, their flashlights scanning the area, but the figure was gone, leaving only the mannequin standing there, a silent witness to the night's horror. I slumped to the floor, relief washing over me. As the police checked the area and took my statement, my phone buzzed with a message from Selina. She was safe. The police were with her. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. The ordeal was over, but the memory of that night, the eerie silence of the depot, the figure and his haunting gaze stayed with me. We never found out who he was or why he was there. The depot was boarded up soon after, and Selina's nightmares gradually subsided. But every time I pass by that place, I can't help but shudder, the memory of that night forever etched in my mind.